there are things like Corona Hill, for example. But with Hall Ranch 2 kind of moving toward eventual reclamation, we call it, everybody here calls it the andesite property because that's what it is, that's what it's known as here. I guess my purpose in requesting that on the agenda is kind of, instead of rehashing past areas where we haven't always agreed, is looking in toward the future. What do we see as the opportunities for integrating the town's trail system, which happens to have a fair, particularly in Bone Park, a lot of parking available that's not used much, except for special events. Integrating that with the surrounding county trails and open spaces, and I'm just, in particular, I'm kind of interested in Hall Ranch too. We've all seen it being worked on year after year after year. When do you get to the point where you come up with a use plan for that? That's
I don't know the status of a plan to get that finished and open, so I can't speak to that. I mean, I think the town of Lyons is incredibly fortunate that you've got access to Heil Ranch through the paintbrush trail and then the Hall Ranch, which is, huge and extensive, and you can get to it from a number of different places. But, I mean, I think you've got incredible resources. And then the St. Vrain Trail that I got to be at a ribbon cutting on that, had the trail all along the St. Vrain, which is going to go on into Longmont. Boulder County is working to get money to do the multi-use path from Lyons to Boulder that will be off of the highway. It's got a lot of some challenges with some intersections and how do we get through this wonky kind of.
Realistically, is that going to be dependent on federal money? I mean,
Probably it's it's a $90 million project. And
I have a different perspective.
Okay.
It's a big project and there's some challenging intersections and we're trying to stay within the CDOT right of way, but then there's some places where we may need to work with some private landowners and with City of Boulder, open space and mountain parks lands. So, I mean, I think this community is really, really well suited, and with the traffic that comes through here going to Rocky Mountain National Park or even, going to Hall Ranch, I think you've got a lot of resources. We were up here at a town hall meeting a couple of years ago and a question came up about Corona Hill and, whether our open space department would take another look at Corona Hill and, and I think they feel pretty strongly that with the grades and the kind of trail design that, that their standards require, that it would just take a tremendous number of switchbacks. And there's concerns about the damage to the ecosystem, fragmentation, et cetera.
We had some people that have had a lot of experience with trails here, and they have a different perspective. But I don't want to retread that ground. I mean,
yeah.
At the time, I was on the board back then when that was being discussed, and the open space people came to a board meeting. One of the things we suggested was, let's do a walk around up there, and you can show us on the ground how this would work, and we can show you. With some of the trail advocates who had been involved with this for years, we can show you where there's some old ranch roads that are already in place that would seem to make good trails, and tell us why that would work. And they said, we'd be glad to do that. Let's organize it. And they never did, despite multiple follow-ups. We never got that done after a month. So, but beyond that, I'm really kind of interested in if their decision stays the same, Corona Hill is off limits, what else can we do? And yeah, we have that Hall Ranch is close, but to get to Hall Ranch from Lyons, you have to get on a busy highway, either Highway 7 or Highway 36 to get there. There are bottlenecks and a little narrow bridge on Highway 7. So some of our perspective has always been, how do we get non-highway, just like you're working on between Boulder and Lyons, how do we get non-busy highway access to the trails? And we do have direct access to Howell Ranch from Bone Park with a big parking lot. And Howell Ranch will eventually connect to Hall 2, as I understand it. And so we just but kind of input standpoint, at one time there was a north foothills area public committee that provided input to Boulder County Parks and Open Space. It was disbanded at some point. And I've gotten a lot of inquiries from old timers around here. When are we gonna be able to provide public input again? And when are they gonna, knowing what's coming on Hall Ranch 2 and decide, when are they gonna be receptive to getting Lyons, input from Lyons area residents in the town and the Parks Commission and that? So I guess, any ideas of when they might open it up for public input?
Well, this is something we can take back to Parks and Open Space. I don't think there's a, you sent this to us, so. I don't think there's a public process that's contemplated right now. But I don't know with Hall 2, whether they're gonna do a whole new master plan and really look at those connections. I know it took a long time to get that north access to Heil. And because there was a lot of,
Yes,
the neighborhood didn't want the parking lot and, and just kind of had to work through it to finally get where now there's a parking lot and people love it. And so that took a long
I
time.
did.
From my perspective, the most helpful thing is like collective prioritization. So what I see happening a lot of times is trying to work on everything at once, resulting in nothing getting done. And so like the trails, Commissioner Levy was talking about connecting Lyons to Longmont and Lyons to Boulder and future trail connections. The most recent Dr. Cog process where we collectively have access to some funding and we work together through the sub-regional forum to prioritize those dollars. This particular trail wasn't the priority. There was the other trail that we ended up funding for Lyons. And when you look at dollars per capita, I'm always very impressed with Lyons, and you're able to punch above your weight and deliver excellent projects. And so I think the more specificity the board can make about like which of all of these different priorities is your focus, and as the community, like what's the number one? Because if we have a good understanding of the town board and the town's number one priority, it makes it easier to focus on getting that contemplated in a shorter period. Because I don't think all the different trails we've just mentioned can all happen at the same time.
Agreed.
So I like the more you can have a unified vision, the easier it is for us to then be good partners and deliver on that. Versus like, we also each have constituencies here too, right? Like our constituents live in Lyons and live in the mountain communities surrounding. And so we still have to balance those different things. But it is easier if we understand your number one priority.
Kind of my question mentioned is federal money going to be necessary to do a project as extensive as the connection to Boulder? If seems to be the case that for the next 3 years at least, that federal money is going to be hard to
We're
obtain.
not giving up.
We shouldn't give up. Should we look at other things that might not be dependent on federal money? And you're right, priorities here. We have a Parks Commission that makes recommendations on that and a lot of active local trail advocates. And so if the commissioners would be receptive to, here's what we think our priorities are, I think that's something we could focus on, other people's comments.
Yeah, we can do that. And we can also, we'll get back and communicate with Victoria about what the plan is on Hall Ranch 2 and finishing up the remediation, and then what would that look like?
Some of the feedback we've gotten is that as soon as we get the remediation done, then we can reinstitute citizen input. But the response to that, I think, from some people locally has been, well, if you know what it's going to look like and you're getting close to that point, why do you have to wait until, the last part of it's remediated to start planning? If here's what we plan to do.
Yeah.
That's kind of the question.
Just one comment on federal funding, and then I do think, like you said, I don't know what everyone else's different perspective is on the trails, but this is one person's opinion that I've advocated for over time, and I still think it's a good idea, is oftentimes when we're working regionally on the federal funding, because there is some funding that is just formula allocated to our area. And so sometimes what happens is each jurisdiction tries to compete for that same funding, and then we get 5 or 6 or 7 different federal projects. When if we would collaborate together better and federalize the biggest project and none of the others, we could actually save quite a lot of money collectively, because it adds at least 40% to a project to federalize it. So if we could work together better through intergovernmental agreements, through establishing some of these types of things, and have confidence in what we're doing together, we could actually collectively save money and do different projects more quickly. It just, what has happened over time is that each group ends up looking at their project and saying, well, but I really want to go for that, and then going for that. And so then we end up federalizing more projects than we need to. Like if we would have, over the last 10 years, only federalized the diagonal and just used local dollars for all the other projects, we could have done more projects. It would have been much more cost effective.
You know, first of all, let me just preface what I'm gonna say with I have huge respect for the open space people. I mean, as I mentioned before, I've worked on conservation organizations before. And when I moved out here and found out about Boulder County Parks and Open Space, I went, Yahoo, these people really know what they're doing. The flip side of this is that there's a perception among the community, not just in Lyons, but in everywhere, that there are cases where people just don't understand why public access is not allowed. And I'll give you the point in question because you brought up Hall Ranch too. So the reach of the river from the arched bridge out by the andesite mine, all the way down to, almost the intersection of South St. Vrain Road and another road there, was restored after the flood. The restoration was all done, I think, circa 2016. And I had been talking to people at Parks and Open Space, and I've asked them, so what's the plan? What's the management plan for this? Is it gonna be public access? Well, what happened within 2 years, the entire property was ringed with barbed wire and the medallions that say no public access. Naturally, I had to ask the question again when the andesite mine came up for restoration, and they said, oh, we're gonna fold in the andesite mine management plan with that reach of the St. Vrain River. Didn't make much sense to me because I think the andesite mine restoration is going to be complete about 3 years out once all the plans have been established and you know, the state signs off on the reclamation there. So just a little editorializing here in that when we have an organization that's supported with tax dollars, I think it's in the best interest of that organization to show how those dollars are used and to not upset people by not allowing public access on an area. Now we're going on 10 years and we're not sure why. Because it seemed to me that if whether public access was allowed or not, or to be allowed or not, then there should have been a management plan put forward to specify that. And you could say, no, you can't come in here for reasons of ecological concerns or endangered species and whatnot. But to just summarily ring it with barbed wire sort of sticks in the craw of a lot of people here. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I will say we have a brand new director of Parks and Open Space. He hasn't even been on the job for a month yet. And one of the challenges that he faces is this big backlog in completion of management plans. We buy property when we can, so it's available and so let's get this property. And we don't always have the funds or the personnel to do those management plans on a timely basis. And so this is a major project for him to prioritize and, you know, and get working on that backlog and pare that down. I'll just, you know, my feeling, and this is, again, I'll just speak for me, but, you know, we buy a fair number of properties that we never intend to make public. Because of their habitat resources, or just because they're too small, fragmented, too remote, you know, they're just not big enough to do, but we might preserve them because of some habitat connectivity issues or, you know, variety of things. And I know from, well, a field trip that Commissioner Stolzman and I did to the andesite mine to look at the reclamation effort. And I think they are still gonna do some work on the creek, the river, I believe, but they were pointing out, you know, behind there in that land, just the incredible, like bird and plant communities that are like unparalleled, that, you know, we want to preserve them. That's part of the mission of these tax dollars. And I know the public you know, it says it's open space, but it's closed, and how can that be? But, you know, that is one of the missions of those tax dollars, is to preserve these incredibly valuable biodiversity areas.
So I think why the exception is a little bit skewed here in Lyons is because, for example, Ohio, I think 65% of that is off limits. And there's some portions of Hall that may be off limits. That's not the percentage in a lot of the other properties. But so our perception is a little bit skewed because there's these two large open space properties we have probably have the largest percentage of their property that is off limits. So, well, by the way, who is the new director? I didn't,
His name is Jason Sook,
how do you spell that?
SEUC.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, I didn't see that.
yeah, yeah.
Once he gets his feet on the ground, I think we would welcome a visit from him and some of the staff that we've had here before to discuss with the board, maybe in a workshop format of what can be done, what are the management plans for areas in this area, you know, for trails in this area, everything. I think that would be a productive thing to do. And so I think that had been mentioned before, but then there was a change of director, so I think a future engagement with the new director and some of the staff would be good thing to do. Again, looking at the clock, herbicide use is the next thing on the agenda, and I know that's the last town hall that the commissioners did in Lyons, that drew the interest of about 98% of the packed crowd that came. And so if you could provide, you know, where do you stand? I still see things posted on social media with helicopters spraying, and which hasn't happened in years, but if you could kind of update us on where that stands countywide and come up in Lyons as well.
I mean, I'm happy to,
Yeah, there was a moratorium for a while, then it was off, and it's back on, and
Yeah.
where does that stay now?
question of where are we at right now?
Yeah.
There's nothing on the table right now for the meeting that I'm aware of that's scheduled to discuss.
May 21st.
Oh, you have more notes than I do. Well, why don't you answer?
But yeah, we have a public meeting scheduled on May 21st at 9 AM. It's part of our business meeting agenda to revisit it. That's the only thing that I can add, so if you want to pick it up from there.
And Red Hill is, where is this, focused on the Red Hill area only, or this meeting?
Yeah, well, so first of all, we revoked any helicopter spraying. That is not gonna happen. It's not, you know, we're only using drones. And, you know, we have a difference of opinion on the board about this, but our drone policy calls for, you know, no 10 feet maximum in height and certain parameters around wind, and using what they call drift cards to make sure that the herbicides are staying where they're supposed to go, and then using drone technology to map where the weed species are, where they are, so we're not just like blanket spraying. It's 800 acres of Red Hill. We're not gonna blanket 800 acres with a herbicide, you know, if the moratorium is lifted. You know, it's to be much more targeted. We've got setbacks from active drainages as well as intermittent drainages. We've got setbacks from property lines. So, you know, it's not just sort of indiscriminate spraying. And, you know, the weed management plan that we adopted, you know, we're gonna renew it again or review it on a 3-year basis. So, you know, we're not doing formal public hearings on this because we did an incredibly exhaustive process. I know the public's not happy, with the vocal members of the public aren't happy with where it ended up. But we did that process, and, you know, then this issue of you know, the fact that spraying on Red Hill was called for in the plan, it was always there in the plan, was gonna go forward, and so we had a meeting to talk about whether to halt that and look at some of the other opportunities with pilot projects.
Yeah, so I'll start over. So we're having a meeting on May 21st.
Yeah.
to talk about, but I think a couple of pieces that for me are kind of important distinguishers in some of the information like you're talking about, Mayor, that there's still photos out there being circulated about helicopters because that's not real time. From like what's happening right now. This is part of, this particular topic is part of a larger plan, like who was, the trustee was talking about management plans, and a review process that, from my perspective, was not reviewed in the past, for a long time. And then we got the chance to look at. I say that because it's not just, herbicide use is not one topic on one piece, it's this part of a bigger plan. The other piece that I think is misinformation from what I've heard is folks thinking that the spraying is happening just kind of widespread all over. And I say that because people have said to me, why would you authorize spraying on our farms and on our homes? And that is not what's happening. I do want to clarify that the areas in the management plan that were in a lot of conversation and we went back and forth and talked about different pieces to protect folks is really my interpretation of that area in the plan that was then approved for drones was based on a terrain that is unsafe for Boulder County Parks and Open Space staff to carry packs to do mechanical weeds. Treatment. And so I just want to clarify that because for me, that's a very different area than just Boulder County Parks and Open Space, why are you spraying everywhere? And so that was a piece of, for me, just an important evaluation of, and in this particular piece of the Red Hill area that came back, to me, it's super helpful for people, one, to reach out. When you asked about that, Mayor, like how do we, you were saying Town Lyons, come to the commissioners on any topic, and we receive emails, we see people at public comment, we have different conversations, we're out doing town halls, etc. to hear. And that conversation around Red Hill area came to us as the board with a lot of questions about the information that had been sent out. So during the plan, I felt like I was asking, we need to make sure that we're letting more people know and with more anticipation and, you know, just responding to some of the concerns. And then when it came up, it was like, oh, now this is happening and we need to respond. And so that was part of the reason that we had that conversation. And it's, we do have a difference of opinion on the board, as Commissioner Levy said. And I just want to make sure that piece for me, there's a couple pieces that are really important about what we're talking about. And so now I see that we have a meeting scheduled.
So it's my understanding that the drone spraying is putting down rejuvera, which is a pre-emergent for the cheatgrass and the feral ryegrass. We saw that up on Crona Hill. Actually, Mark and I were up there and we got a little demonstration of where it had been sprayed with the helicopter before that ended and where the spraying where it was not sprayed. And it was obvious to me that where that pre-emergent had been put down, it had restored the native grasses. And on the other hand, on the other side of it, you know, you had the typical cheatgrass growing 2 feet tall, drying out quickly, forming mats of combustible material. I think that's lost on some people. I think some of the opponents are a bit hyperbolic in their arguments against it. They tend to think that they're spraying Roundup out of the drones when in fact we were told it's just a pre-emergent and it can only be done in the winter time.
The staff included glyphosate and 2,4-D in the spray that they did with helicopters. So there was essentially Roundup that was included with the rejuvera that was sprayed in the area that you looked.
Well, I don't know.
It wasn't,
Is that what?
I do. I'm happy to send you the information. It doesn't, like I can send you exactly what they mixed and they sprayed from helicopters and it was not just rejuvera.
But is the spraying going forward to include glyphosate?
No, I mean, that was included to be banned in the plan, but City of Boulder's done a study on indaziflam and it shows some seriously devastating consequences to the entire seed bank. And so I think it is irresponsible to spray an experimental chemical in a broadcast way across public land that we don't even let people go on because it's so important and so valuable. But we're going to just randomly spray chemicals that we know have PFAS and are carcinogenic onto our land that we're protecting so carefully.
In the interest of time, let me hit the part B under that item number 4 on the agenda, and that is you mentioned the property project we did that went very well with Boulder County Parks and Open Space and a lot of Lyons volunteers and some non-Lyons volunteers. We did a lot of brush clearing, everything. We have a neighborhood, Miley Prospect, Ewald neighborhood that we call it, that it occupies part of Corona Hill. It's probably the most at-risk fire section of Lyons because it's on the west. There's trees and grasses above it. And the question is, would it be possible at some point to have a meeting in Lyons to get input from primarily that neighborhood in terms of they both have high fire risk, which concerns a lot of them. And there are advocates I know in that neighborhood because I've heard from them that don't want the spraying even under the revised management plan. But I think a meeting was tried to be held like 2 or 3 years ago, and it was people from outside Lyons came in and comments, and some of the local people didn't even stay around. They just said, they're not here to listen to us. Would it be possible to at some point set up a meeting where people from that neighborhood in particular could be basically clear out some time for them to be heard and get their input, which I would expect would be competing input. Some people maximize fire protection, some totally anti-spraying. You think
We
that's
all,
doable?
we all meet with people who contact us to meet,
Yeah.
and so I'm sure like any of us would be happy to meet with them. We meet with residents all the time.
Well, and we do town hall meetings in Lyons at least on an annual
But
basis.
Like the last one, there were like 40 people that signed up, and somebody from Lyons who may be reluctant to
Yeah,
come at a meeting like
Yeah.
that, could we do something for just a Lyons input? That's
yeah,
just
I
an
don't,
idea.
I mean, I don't know that Corona Hill is scheduled for spraying.
I don't think it is.
Yeah, I don't think it is,
But
so,
there is, like I said, Greg and I walked it, and there are ryegrass and cheatgrass problems up there, and it's not scheduled
all
for
the
spraying.
spraying is to spray it.
But yeah, the
Just
question would be,
Yeah,
people live in that neighborhood, who would like
yeah,
spraying done
you know,
to
I think
to
so.
reduce their fire risk, and who's totally against spraying? I
We
mean,
can have, somebody from our resource management division contact. I don't know who the person would be, we've had like, after the Marshall Fire, there were. Lots of concerns about the grasses on open space not being mowed and, and that being dangerous, and so. We changed our management plans and now we try where we can actually get equipment in to mow within a certain number of feet of a fence line, so. I think if there are management practices on that hill that people are concerned about, I think we can. See if
I think that would be
take a look
helpful,
at it.
just
Yeah.
explain to the people,
Yeah.
particularly in that neighborhood, but other parts of the country, what are the management practices for that area? Because
Yeah.
it is a high risk. 5 minutes to go, housing. I think, let's cover housing in 5 minutes. Item A on there, I guess you're aware that the prior board decided after considerable study and cost analysis that the part of the regional housing partnership that had been under discussion with Gilpin County, Nederland, and the town of Lyons, and I think,
Yeah, where Blackhawk is, what's
Yeah.
it, Central City.
Central City. When we got the preliminary estimates of what it would cost for Lyons to do that, we just decided it wasn't an efficient use of our funds when we already have Boulder County Housing here in Lyons managing pretty well, in my opinion. 3 different local, and 4 counting, Seward, local affordable housing projects. So that, I don't know what discussion people might want to bring up on that or questions on that, but that was the decision that the prior board had made.
I have just a question for the group, I think, I had just read that, so I didn't know that had happened, but appreciate the update. I would be curious to know from the group that was working on that at the time, what was some of the goals that you were looking for? Because you wouldn't have been considering doing a housing authority if you didn't have some goals for Lyons around housing. So I was just curious somewhat,
I don't think,
because those goals probably haven't changed.
yeah, I don't think anybody here was on the board that was made the decision to go forward with that initially. It was the board before last, I guess. Victoria, maybe.
About it a little bit in planning commission. I mean,
Yeah,
I think at some point, and it's probably 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, previous planner. There was a sense we weren't sure we were being fully served by Boulder County Housing Authority at the time. it feels like that's kind of changed in a parallel track with the regional housing authority not working out. So it feels like it's kind of worked itself out in a way, if you will. That's my 2 cents.
Our director of the housing authority, Susanna Lopez Baker, just shared with us the news that Lyons is the second jurisdiction in the state to meet your target for Proposition 123 funds. And those are all Boulder County Housing Authority.
And that was part of the motivation, and even though I wasn't on the board back then, for forming this partnership. At that time, we didn't know how we'd meet, if we could meet or how we could meet our Prop 123 goals. But with the acquisition of the Seward property, we do meet them. And so that goal has been satisfied. And also kind of flowing into the last thing on the agenda too. At that time, the town of Lyons was short of meeting its goals that it had set after the flood of 10% local affordable housing, which is what we thought we could do at the time, and participating in the Boulder County partnership where 12% overall goal, but with a specified number of target units for Lyons and Nederland as the quote mountain region there. At the time, we started exploring the Mountain Town Housing Authority. We hadn't met those goals either, but now we've met those. And so it was kind of like, we made progress without that. And I think the tab on that was going to be like $80,000 a year. Is that right, Lee? Is that 80,000? And we just thought we met the stated goals that we had from post flood here, and we've qualified for Prop 123. Can we afford to spend $80,000 a year on that? And the answer from the board was no. So I think that was our motivating.
I think there was also a sense that there might be some different objectives or some different priorities for some of the other geographies. And I think that goes to your point, Commissioner Saltzman, that for us to have some good collective prioritization, we need to do our own individual local prioritization to bring to the table. So in housing, we had a couple of objectives, we met them. Do we have other objectives? We have to sort out whether we think we have enough affordable or not, whether we have enough attainable or workforce or not. And once we decide that those are our priorities, we'll bring them and maybe we can work them together. And we could have worked them with these 3 or 4 other geographies, but we certainly will work them with the county.
Yeah, that's, I know when I first heard about this feasibility study, my first thought was that, for us, like our smaller developments like Tungsten Village up in Nederland, it doesn't pencil out. And I thought, if you have a whole housing authority that is comprised of small towns that are trying to do small developments, I don't know how you can finance that. I think, we have a director who's incredibly creative and really eager. If there's an opportunity, she's gonna jump on it and the wheels start spinning and she figures it out. We were overextended for a period of time with, the very big project we have in Willoughby Corner. And it was, that was really taking all our resources. It still is, but I think we've got some fresh leadership and just a ton of energy, which is really exciting.
And of course, we're still actively working with the county, with Boulder County Housing on both the sewer project and their discussions going on the 2 Carter Court lots too.
Yeah, right.
We're anxiously awaiting, proposed details and what's expected from Lyons and on that. And so there are 2 projects ongoing in Lyons right now. So
Yeah.
I didn't want, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say that we have to thank the voters for approving an affordable and attainable housing tax to be able to, for BCHA to be able to listen and support. But I will just offer that our director that Commissioner was just talking about, she will come up here and do a presentation, update, maybe jump on virtually. But she's kind of going around the area just to maintain those relationships and make sure that y'all know who she is as well.
And she was
had
here 2
heard a
weeks ago,
couple of
right?
our-
Yeah.
yes, she was.
Yeah.
She's really enjoyed it. She's been very forthcoming and answered questions very well.
I just didn't want us to break up.
Yes.
We bring these to all our town halls and all our joint meetings, just for awareness of, we do human services for everybody in the county, and, so it gives you a little window into some of the needs in your community that you may not be aware of, and saying, as we do the human services programs, we see your residents in a totally different way, so it's always nice to see that. So.
Thank you
Once
so
again,
much.
thank you for making the trip here to visit with us. It's been very productive. We both know each other because we're in a lot of these things together.
Well, right,
sure.
and you're
Oh,
a really new, I was here September, I guess, to talk about this year's 1B, the mental health funding, and I think there's the two of you were.
Okay.
Were you there too? Oh, okay.
Yep.
All right. You didn't have vocal. But yeah, lots of new faces.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now we have to go pave some local streets.
I know, you'll have to explain it to me, because I go home and I don't have enough education to know.